What you're about to hear happened in a small Ohio town where a German shepherd named Atlas did something that left an entire funeral speechless and exposed a conspiracy that shocked America. By the end of this story, this dog will be called a hero, a detective, and a miracle worker. But it all started with him refusing to leave a little girl's coffin. What he knew would change everything. Before we dive into Atlas's incredible story, hit that subscribe button. Stories like this don't just entertain, they restore your faith in loyalty and justice. Detective Jake Morrison had seen enough darkness in his 38 years to recognize light when it appeared. Every afternoon at 4:15, that light came in the form of a 5-year-old girl with honey-colored curls and eyes that sparkled like captured starlight. Atlas, Jake's 6-year-old German shepherd, carried scars from his K-9 service, a slight limp in his left hip from shrapnel during a warehouse raid 2 years prior. What the dog had lost in speed, he'd gained in wisdom, the kind that comes from years of reading human intentions through scent and body language. Millbrook, Ohio, stretched across 15,000 residents like a Norman Rockwell painting come to life. Maple-lined streets bore names of the trees that had stood there first. Children rode bicycles without helmets while neighbors borrowed sugar and returned covered dishes. It was America at its most innocent, where evil wasn't supposed to take root. Central Park anchored the town's heart, where Atlas and Jake walked every evening. That's where they encountered Chloe Mitchell. She emerged from behind an ancient oak one Tuesday afternoon, clutching a chocolate chip cookie that was more crumbs than coherence. Her mother, Sarah, observed from a distant bench, medical scrubs still wrinkled from her shift at Millbrook General Hospital. "May I pet your dog?" Chloe asked, her voice soft as whispered prayers. Atlas, trained never to accept food from strangers, settled onto his haunches and cocked his noble head. Something in those innocent eyes communicated in a language predating commands and protocols. When Chloe extended her small palm with the offering, Atlas accepted it with the delicacy of a mother bird feeding her nestling. "He's taken with you," Jake observed, genuinely surprised. "He typically doesn't." "He's my guardian angel," Chloe declared with the absolute certainty children possess about profound truths. From that moment, Chloe stationed herself beside the oak every afternoon at precisely 4:15, always carrying treats saved from lunch. Atlas would identify her blonde locks from 50 yards away, his tail beginning a rhythm that spoke of pure contentment. She would encircle his neck with slender arms, press her face into his fur, and share secrets meant only for four-legged confidants. Sarah Mitchell bore the particular exhaustion of single mothers juggling night shifts and endless worries. But watching her daughter with Atlas brought the first genuine smile to her features in months. "She struggles with friendships," Sarah confided to Jake one evening. "Other children find her too reserved, too introspective. But with your partner, she transforms," Jake completed, understanding perfectly. What puzzled Jake was Atlas's consistent tension whenever Officer Danny Brooks patrolled past in his squad car. The 29-year-old officer would wave enthusiastically, displaying his practiced smile, but Atlas would edge closer to Chloe, hackles barely perceptible, a warning so subtle only Jake detected it. The explanation came from Sarah herself, delivered in hushed tones that carried the weight of dangerous knowledge. "I've filed a complaint against Captain Richards," she revealed one evening, voice barely above a murmur. "The medical examiner reports don't align with what I observe in the emergency room. Cases closing prematurely, evidence vanishing. I believe he's orchestrating cover-ups." Jake felt ice form in his chest. Tom Richards had commanded for 12 years of his 27-year career. Respected and feared in equal measure. "Sarah, that's treacherous ground." "I possess documentation," she stated quietly. "Tomorrow I'm presenting everything to federal investigators." Atlas lifted his massive head from Chloe's embrace. intelligent eyes fixed on something beyond human perception. In the distance, a patrol vehicle idled at the intersection, too remote to identify clearly, yet close enough for Atlas to sense the approaching storm. Tomorrow would shatter their peaceful world forever. Thursday morning arrived with crystalline clarity that transforms ordinary moments into sacred memories. Chloe awakened humming, a formless melody about angels and treats that drifted through the Mitchell household like morning light. Atlas visits today, she announced to her cereal, her stuffed elephant, and the cosmos itself. Sarah battled familiar maternal anxiety while preparing for her day shift. The federal appointment loomed at 3 o'clock. By evening, everything would be different. Hopefully safer, certainly complicated. "Stay near the house today, sweetheart," Sarah instructed, kneeling to secure Chloe's shoes. "Don't venture past our mailbox." "I must wait for Atlas," Chloe protested. "He searches for me." "He'll find you. He always does." At precisely 4:15, Chloe positioned herself beside the white mailbox where Maple Street intersected Elm, the exact location where she'd maintained her vigil for 3 months. Her pocket contained 2 chocolate chip cookies, one for Atlas, one for good measure. She hummed her guardian angel song while scanning for Jake's familiar silhouette and Atlas's dignified bearing. Any moment, they would appear around the corner, inaugurating her favorite portion of each day. The black SUV approached from the opposite direction. Officer Danny Brooks gripped the steering wheel with trembling hand despite 3 cups of coffee and a 30-minute call that had drained the color from his face. The dashboard camera that should have documented everything had been manually deactivated 20 minutes earlier. "Simply intimidate her," Captain Richards had instructed. "Frighten the mother through the child. Make them comprehend the consequences of meddling in official business." But observing Chloe standing alone beside the mailbox, her golden hair catching afternoon sunlight like a halo, something cold and desperate seized Brooks's chest. This wasn't abstract intimidation anymore. This was a child who knew his name, who waved during his patrols, who likely still believed police officers were heroes. "There has to be another way, Tom," he whispered, accelerating to 45 miles per hour, 15 over the residential limit, fast enough to deliver a message, not fast enough to cause fatalities. Except Chloe spotted the approaching vehicle and stepped backward in alarm, her heel catching on uneven pavement. She tumbled into the street precisely as Brooks yanked the wheel hard right. The devastating impact that followed would haunt Danny Brooks' nightmares forever. Chloe lay motionless on the asphalt, her honey-colored hair fanned around her head like a shattered angel's crown. The cookies scattered across the pavement in fragments too small to identify. Brooks stumbled from the SUV, his complexion ash-white. "Dear God, I wasn't supposed to." Mrs. Henderson from across the street came running, hands pressed to her mouth. "Someone call emergency services. Get an ambulance." But Jake and Atlas arrived first, 3 minutes ahead of schedule because Atlas had been pulling toward the park all afternoon, restless and agitated in ways Jake had never witnessed. Atlas reached Chloe before Jake could process the catastrophe. The shepherd dropped to his belly beside the small, still form and released a sound that would torment everyone present. A howl of anguish so profound, so utterly heartbroken, that approaching sirens seemed to soften in reverence. "She darted out suddenly," Brooks explained to anyone within earshot. "Appeared from nowhere. My camera malfunctioned. Nothing I could do." But Atlas wasn't processing Brooks's explanations. He was detecting something else entirely, something the paramedics with their equipment and protocols and urgent voices couldn't perceive. A heartbeat, faint as a butterfly wings, irregular as hope itself, but present. When paramedics attempted to examine Chloe, Atlas refused to relocate. When they tried lifting her onto the stretcher, he positioned his body between them and the girl, not aggressively, but with the immovable certainty of bedrock. The animals traumatize, one paramedic observed. Grief affects animals profoundly. Dr. Amanda Chen arrived with the coroner's vehicle, her expression set in practiced neutrality acquired through years of confronting mortality. But something about the child's coloring troubled her, a subtle warmth that death typically erased. "I need additional time," she informed the paramedics. Atlas observed Dr. Chen's examination, his keen gaze tracking every movement. When she shook her head and reached for her phone to declare time of death, Atlas performed an action unprecedented in 6 years of service. He ignored Jake's direct command and placed his paw over Dr. Chen's hand. The coroner looked into those intelligent eyes and perceived something that created hesitation. Perhaps, perhaps we should transport to the hospital for the family's closure." "She's gone, doctor," the lead paramedic said gently. "Transport regardless." As they loaded Chloe into the ambulance, Atlas leaped beside the stretcher before anyone could intervene. He curved his body around hers, his head resting on her shoulder, breathing steady and protective. Jake moved to extract him, but Dr. Chen caught his arm. "Allow him to remain." The ambulance doors closed on what everyone believed was a grief-stricken dog bidding farewell to his dearest friend. None understood that Atlas wasn't mourning. He was standing guard. He was maintaining watch. He was protecting a secret that would either save them all or destroy everything they thought they knew about life, death, and the power of unwavering love. St. Mary's Episcopal Church had anchored Millbrook's main thoroughfare for 87 years, its white spire reaching toward promises that sometimes seemed too distant to grasp. On Saturday morning, every pew overflowed with 300 souls gathered to bid farewell to a 5-year-old girl whose story had barely begun. The casket gleamed white and small, adorned with pink roses matching the dress Chloe had worn for kindergarten graduation. She appeared to be sleeping, serene and untouched by whatever shadows had claimed her. Sarah Mitchell occupied the front pew, sustained by grief and medical intervention. She hadn't spoken since Thursday evening, when Dr. Chen had officially declared her daughter deceased from blunt force trauma and internal hemorrhaging. "Sometimes these tragedies occur instantly," the doctor had explained. "Sometimes there's no opportunity for pain." But Atlas possessed different knowledge. The shepherd had maintained his vigil for 67 consecutive hours. He refused nourishment, water, or departure from the hospital corridor where Chloe's body rested. Jake had attempted every approach: commands, treats, physical restraint, even veterinary sedation. But Atlas absorbed each effort and returned to his station. "He's processing loss," the hospital chaplain had observed. "Animals experience bereavement as profoundly as humans." "This transcends grief," Jake murmured, watching Atlas pace the corridor's length for the 100th time. "This is something else entirely." Now, as the congregation rose for the opening hymn, Atlas proceeded down St. Mary's center aisle with the bearing of a soldier on sacred mission. Whispers followed his progress. "That's her dog. Poor creature, they were inseparable. Look at his limp, the valiant old fellow." Atlas ignored the commentary. His focus remained fixed on the white casket, on the motionless form visible through the open lid. He had unfinished business. Upon reaching the altar, Atlas positioned himself beside the casket and produced a sound that silenced 300 people. Not a howl this time, but a low, rumbling vocalization that seemed to resonate through the wooden floors and into everyone's bones. "We should remove the animal," Father Martinez whispered. "No," Sarah declared, her voice fracturing like ice. "He stays." Atlas placed his front paws on the casket's edge and with deliberate care climbed inside. The congregation gasped as 200 pounds of German Shepherd arranged himself around Chloe's petite form, his body curving protectively, his massive head settling gently on her shoulder. "Merciful heavens," someone breathed. Jake stepped forward, but something in Atlas's posture halted him. The dog wasn't disturbing anything or being destructive. He was simply present, vigilant, alert in a manner that seemed almost supernatural. Captain Tom Richards selected that moment for his entrance, striding down the aisle in dress uniform, embodying the respected law enforcement official, offering community comfort. At 52, Richards commanded authority through presence alone. Silver hair, strong jaw, eyes that cataloged everything. "This disruption is unacceptable," he announced, his voice carrying 12 years of command authority. "That animal requires immediate removal." Atlas raised his head and focused those intelligent brown eyes on Richards. What followed would be replayed across social media platforms for weeks. Atlas bared his teeth and released a growl so deep, so menacing, that several front-row mourners actually retreated. "Easy, partner," Jake called, but Atlas had shifted his attention elsewhere. He was staring at Officer Danny Brooks, who had entered through the side door and now stood frozen halfway down the aisle. The young officer's face was pale, his hands visibly trembling as Atlas's growl intensified. "What's wrong with that dog?" someone whispered. "Why is it watching Officer Brooks like that?" Brooks stepped forward, perhaps attempting to demonstrate innocence, perhaps hoping to calm the animal. But Atlas erupted from the casket with a snarl that reverberated off stone walls. Brooks stumbled backward as 200 pounds of enraged shepherd advanced. Atlas didn't attack. His training prevented that. But he planted himself between Brooks and the casket, hackles raised, teeth exposed, every muscle coiled for combat. "Stay back!" Brooks shouted, his voice breaking. That beast lost its mind. But Jake was reading Atlas carefully, interpreting signals learned through 6 years of partnership. This wasn't madness. This wasn't grief-induced aggression. This was recognition. "Atlas, stand down," Jake commanded. The dog turned toward Jake, conflict evident in his intelligent gaze. He whined once, a sound of pure frustration, then returned his attention to Brooks with laser focus. "That animal poses a threat," Captain Richards declared. "Someone retrieve a tranquilizer." "Absolutely not," said Dr. Amanda Chen. The medical examiner stepped forward from her position at the church's rear. Her expression was troubled, her hands clasped tightly. "No sedation," she repeated. "I believe the dog is attempting communication." "Dogs don't solve crimes, doctor," Richards responded with barely concealed disdain. "Perhaps not," Chen replied quietly, "but they remember sense, they recognize fear, and they distinguish between accident and intention." The church fell silent except for Atlas's continuous low growl. Every gaze fixed on the extraordinary scene, the dog protecting the deceased child, the officer retreating, the captain demanding order. Sarah Mitchell rose from her pew like someone awakening from a nightmare. "What is he trying to tell us?" Atlas turned toward her voice, his growl softening to a whimper. He looked from Sarah to the casket, from the casket to Brooks, from Brooks back to Sarah. His message was unmistakable to anyone willing to interpret it. Danger exists. Threats remain. Protection is necessary. "This is absurd," Brooks protested, his voice too loud, too defensive. "It's an animal. It doesn't comprehend what happened." But Atlas comprehended more than anyone realized. He understood that the heartbeat beneath his paws was strengthening. He understood that time was critical. He understood that genuine danger hadn't finished with Chloe Mitchell. Most importantly, he understood that no one would believe him until catastrophe struck again, unless he forced them to listen. Dr. Amanda Chen had conducted over 400 autopsies during her 15-year career, but she had never spent 3 sleepless nights analyzing a single report. Something about Chloe Mitchell's case challenged her professional instincts like a persistent fever. Sunday morning discovered her in Millbrook General Hospital's basement, surrounded by files, photographs, and documentation that had earned her recognition as the region's most respected medical examiner. The chronology doesn't align, she muttered, adjusting her reading glasses repeatedly. The official report stated Chloe had sustained fatal internal trauma from vehicular impact at 4:23 p.m. Thursday, but tissue samples revealed a different narrative, cellular changes suggesting trauma had occurred 30 minutes before impact. Chen reached for her phone and contacted Jake Morrison. Detective? Amanda Chen speaking. We need to meet. Jake arrived within 20 minutes, Atlas limping alongside him. The shepherd had barely consumed food since the funeral, his entire being focused on something beyond human comprehension. He tested the air as they entered the hospital, then fixed his gaze on Chen with intensity that raised goosebumps. What have you discovered? Jake asked. Chen spread autopsy photographs across her desk, indicating specific areas with her pen tip. These injuries don't correspond to the accident report. Examine the bruising pattern on her ribs. Jake studied the images, his stomach clenching. That's not vehicular trauma. Correct. Those are compression marks from hands, adult hands. Chen's voice remained steady and professional, but Jake detected underlying fury. Someone grasped this child forcefully enough to leave marks. Someone harmed her before that SUV made contact. Atlas suddenly approached a corner cabinet containing personal effects from the scene. He pressed his nose against the metal door and released a sharp whine. What's stored there? Jake inquired. Chen unlocked the cabinet and extracted a sealed evidence bag containing a small, glittering object. This was recovered near the scene. We assumed it detached from her clothing during impact. Atlas's reaction was immediate and violent. He retreated from the bag, hackles rising, a growl building in his throat that forced both humans backward. What is it? Jake whispered. Chen held the bag toward the light. Inside rested a small enamel pin, the type worn on police uniforms to indicate rank and service. But this wasn't Officer Brooks's pin. This belongs to Captain Richards, Chen said quietly. The pieces assembled in Jake's mind with nauseating clarity. Sarah's plan to report Richards to federal investigators. Chloe's routine of waiting by the mailbox daily at identical times. Brooks's story about malfunctioning dashboard cameras. This wasn't accidental, Jake concluded. Atlas barked once, sharp, urgent, demanding. He paced to the door, glanced back at Jake, then scratched the floor with increasing agitation. He wants us to follow, Chen observed. Follow him where? But Atlas was already moving, leading them from the hospital into the crisp Sunday morning air. He moved purposefully now, his limp barely noticeable as he traced a path comprehensible only to him. They followed Atlas through residential neighborhoods, past the accident scene, into an industrial district where abandoned warehouses stood like forgotten monuments to Millbrook's manufacturing heritage. Atlas halted before a rusted metal structure and sat down, his gaze fixed on Jake with unmistakable expectation. This facility's been vacant for years, Jake noted, but he was already approaching the entrance. The lock was new, recent, expensive. Someone's been utilizing this space, Chen murmured. Jake called for backup, then employed his lock-picking skills, a talent from less respectable days, to open the door. The warehouse was dark, empty except for dust and memories. Atlas immediately headed toward a corner where someone had constructed a makeshift office space, file cabinets, a desk, chairs, and photographs covering an entire wall. Surveillance photographs of Sarah Mitchell, of Chloe, their daily routines, their house, their vehicle. Reconnaissance photos taken over weeks, possibly months. Jesus, Jake exhaled. But Chen focused on something else, a cloth bag concealed behind one file cabinet. Inside were Chloe's missing bracelet, a fragment of her torn dress, and something that shattered Chen's professional composure. Jake, she whispered, this is blood, fresh blood, from Thursday. Atlas pressed against Jake's leg. trembling with an emotion the detective had never witnessed. Not fear, not anger, but desperate urgency. The dog gazed up at him with eyes that seemed to contain universal secrets. "She's alive," Jake said suddenly, words emerging before rational thought could intervene. "That's what you're communicating." Atlas whined, soft, heartbroken, hopeful. Chen stared at them both, her scientific mind battling something deeper, more intuitive. The cellular changes, the chronology inconsistencies. What if she wasn't deceased during our examination? What if she was in some form of profound unconscious state? Caused by what? Oxygen deprivation, trauma-induced coma. There are documented cases of people appearing deceased for hours before revival. Jake felt reality shift beneath his feet. "We need to return to the hospital, immediately." But as they turned to exit, footsteps echoed outside the warehouse. Slow, deliberate footsteps that halted just beyond the door. Atlas moved between the humans and the entrance, his body coiled for action. He recognized that scent. He knew those footsteps. He knew the real danger was about to reveal itself. Captain Tom Richards entered the warehouse, his hand resting casually on his service weapon. "You three have been exceptionally busy," he said calmly. "Exceptionally unfortunate and busy indeed." Captain Tom Richards had worn his badge for 27 years, advancing to his current position 12 years ago. And during that tenure, he had learned that power flowed like water, seeking the lowest level, pooling in dark places, drowning anyone who opposed its current. "You should have maintained your distance," he said, advancing into the warehouse. Behind him appeared Officer Danny Brooks, his youthful face ashen with guilt and terror. Jake positioned himself protectively before Dr. Chen, while Atlas took his place at Jake's side, every muscle tense and prepared. The shepherd's lips pulled back in a silent snarl, his gaze never leaving Richard's face. "Sarah Mitchell couldn't ignore what didn't concern her," Richards continued, his tone carrying the reasonable inflection of someone explaining simple facts. "She had to investigate medical reports, had to question cases that were properly concluded." "Because you were concealing crimes," Chen said, discovering her voice. "How many victims, Richards? How many families were denied justice because you buried evidence?" Richards smiled, and the expression was colder than winter storms. "Sufficient to secure my comfortable retirement. Sufficient to maintain this community's stability. You'd be amazed how many problems disappear when people understand there are consequences for inconvenience." Brooks shifted nervously beside his captain, his hands trembling as he grappled with his complicity's weight. "Tom, this has escalated beyond control. She's just a child, was just a child. We never intended what, Danny?" Richard's voice carried warning. "For Sarah Mitchell's daughter to be in the wrong location at the wrong time? For our demonstration to exceed its intended parameters?" Jake felt understanding crystallize. "You ordered Brooks to intimidate them, to frighten Sarah away from federal testimony." "A simple message," Richards confirmed. "Drive past the residence, create noise, make the mother understand potential consequences if she didn't reconsider her civic obligations." But Danny panicked when he encountered the girl alone. "She stepped into the street," Brooks whispered, his voice fracturing. "I was only supposed to frighten her, but she fell, and I couldn't stop in time. And instead of summoning medical assistance, you contacted me," Richards completed. "Instead of attempting rescue, you worried about self-preservation." Atlas suddenly advanced 3 steps, his growl building to a crescendo that made the warehouse rafters vibrate. But his attention had shifted beyond Richards, toward the door, where another figure had materialized. Dr. Marcus Webb, the hospital's chief administrator, entered the warehouse like someone approaching his own execution. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his typically perfect hair disheveled. "The dog knows," Webb said quietly. Somehow, it knows everything. Chen stared at her colleague in growing horror. Marcus, what are you doing here? Dr. Webb has been invaluable in managing inconvenient autopsy results, Richards explained. Remarkable how cooperative people become when their gambling debts exceed their annual salaries. The conspiracy's full scope crashed over Jake like an icy wave. You've been manipulating medical evidence, altering causes of death, concealing abuse evidence. For 3 years, Webb confirmed miserably. Richards would present cases requiring adjustment. A domestic violence death became cardiac failure. A police brutality case became drug overdose. I convinced myself I was protecting community faith in law enforcement. You were protecting your own interests, Chen spat. Atlas suddenly broke from Jake's side and bounded toward a stack of file cabinets against the far wall. He began pawing at a particular drawer, whining with increasing desperation. What is he located now? Richards muttered, moving toward the dog with his hand on his weapon. But Jake reached the cabinet first. Inside the drawer were medical files, dozens of them, cases officially closed but carrying notes in Webb's handwriting that revealed different truths. Jennifer Walsh, age 23, cardiac arrest, Jake read aloud. Webb's notes, massive blunt force trauma consistent with beating, evidence of sexual assault. That case was resolved, Richard said defensively, because you suppressed it. Jake examined more files. Michael Torres, age 16, drug overdose. Webb's notes, bullet wound to chest, execution style. Chen was reading over his shoulder, her face growing paler with each revelation. Dear God, Marcus, how many? 37, Webb whispered. 37 cases where truth was inconvenient. Atlas returned to Jake's side, but his attention was divided between the humans and something else, sounds only he could detect. His ears rotated toward the warehouse entrance, and his tail gave the slightest movement. Sirens, still distant but approaching. Richards detected them too, his casual demeanor fractured, revealing the cornered predator beneath. Which of you summoned backup? I did, Jake said, though he hadn't, before entering the warehouse. It was deception, but necessary. Richard's eyes darted between his conspirators, calculating odds and escape routes. This doesn't conclude here, he said, his hand now fully on his weapon. Too many people possess too much knowledge. But Atlas had detected something else in those approaching sirens, something that made his heart race with an emotion he hadn't experienced in days. Hope. Dr. Chen's phone was ringing. She answered reflexively, her voice shaking. Dr. Chen. The voice on the other end was young, excited, urgent. Doctor, you must come to the hospital immediately. It's about the Mitchell girl. Doctor, she's breathing. The warehouse fell silent except for approaching sirens and the sound of Atlas's tail striking concrete like a drumbeat of pure joy. Chloe Mitchell was alive, and now everyone in that warehouse understood that the conspiracy to conceal her murder had just become something entirely different. A race to save the only witness who could expose them all. Richards raised his weapon, desperation replacing calculation in his eyes. If that girl can testify, it's finished, Tom, Brooks declared, stepping away from his captain. No! Richards swung his gun toward Atlas and Jake. This ends now. But Atlas moved faster than human reflexes could follow. The German shepherd launched himself through the air, intercepting the bullet meant for Jake. The gunshot echoed through the warehouse as Atlas's powerful body collided with Richards, driving him to the ground. Blood spread across Atlas's shoulder, where the bullet had torn through muscle and fur, but the wounded guardian angel never released his grip on Richards' weapon arm until backup burst through the door. Atlas, Jake shouted, dropping to his knees beside his wounded partner. Atlas looked up at him with eyes that held no fear, only love and determination. He had kept his promise. He had protected his family, just as he had promised Chloe in the darkness. Detective Rodriguez and his backup officers secured the warehouse within minutes. But Jake's entire focus centered on Atlas, who lay bleeding but alert on the concrete floor. The German Shepherd's amber eyes remained fixed on Jake's face, his tail giving weak but deliberate movements. "We need a veterinary ambulance," Jake called into his radio, his voice breaking. "Already en route," Rodriguez replied, kneeling beside them. "How bad is it?" Dr. Chen was examining Atlas's wound with gentle hands. The bullet grazed the shoulder muscle. Painful and bloody, but not fatal. "He's going to be fine." Atlas whined softly and tried to stand, his gaze shifting toward the warehouse door. "Easy, boy," Jake murmured. "You've done enough heroics for one day." But Atlas's instincts remained focused on his primary mission. Chloe was alive and alone. The warehouse had been cleared, but the hospital— "He wants to go to Chloe," Dr. Chen observed. "Even wounded, he's thinking about her." Richards, now handcuffed and bleeding from where his head had struck the concrete, glared at them from his position against the warehouse wall. "You think this changes anything? One dog, one girl. There are others who'll finish what I started." Brooks, sitting with his head in his hands, looked up sharply. "Tom, stop. It's over." "Is it?" Richards laughed bitterly. "You think I'm the only one? This corruption goes deeper than you can imagine." Atlas struggled to his feet despite his wound, his protective instincts overriding everything else. Jake steadied him, then looked at Rodriguez. "We need to get to the hospital. Now, if Richards has other people—" "Say no more," Rodriguez said. "I'll coordinate hospital security." The race through Millbrook streets was a blur of sirens and desperate urgency. Atlas sat in the passenger seat of Jake's patrol car, a pressure bandage around his shoulder, his nose testing the air for any sign of threat to a small human. When they reached Millbrook General Hospital, the building was buzzing with controlled chaos. Word of Chloe's revival had spread through the medical staff like electricity, but Dr. Chen had called ahead with security warnings. They found Sarah Mitchell in the pediatric intensive care unit, tears streaming down her face as she watched her daughter's chest rise and fall with steady, determined life. "She opened her eyes 10 minutes ago," Sarah whispered to Jake. "She asked for her guardian angel." Atlas limped into room 314, his wounded shoulder wrapped, but his spirit soaring. Chloe lay in the hospital bed, pale but unmistakably alive, monitors beeping steadily with the rhythm of life that Atlas had detected all along. When Chloe saw Atlas approaching, her face lit up with the brightest smile Jake had ever witnessed. "Guardian angel," she whispered, reaching out her small hand. "You found me in the dark place. You brought me home." Atlas carefully positioned himself beside her bed, mindful of his bandaged shoulder, but determined to fulfill his duty. He rested his massive head gently on the mattress beside her hand. "You're hurt," Chloe observed, her young voice filled with concern. "Did you get hurt protecting me?" Atlas's tail wagged slowly, deliberately. He would take 1,000 bullets for this child. Dr. Patricia Hayes, the pediatric neurologist, entered the room with a chart in her hands and wonder in her eyes. "Her neural responses are remarkable," she told Sarah. "Considering the oxygen deprivation and trauma, her recovery is unprecedented." "How long before we know she's completely okay?" Sarah asked. "Her vital signs are strong, her responses are appropriate, and her memories seem intact. I believe she's going to make a full recovery." Dr. Chen appeared in the doorway with news from the investigation. "Richards and Webb are in custody. Brooks is cooperating fully. We've identified 12 other cases that need to be reopened, and the FBI is taking over the broader corruption investigation." Jake sat in the chair beside Chloe's bed, one hand resting on Atlas's uninjured side. "It's over, sweetheart. The bad men can't hurt you anymore." Chloe looked at Atlas with complete trust and love. "He never left me alone. Even when I couldn't see him, I could feel him watching over me." As evening approached, Atlas refused all attempts to move him to the veterinary hospital for further treatment. The hospital's medical team, recognizing the healing power of his presence, agreed to let him recover in Chloe's room. Some bonds transcend medical explanation, Dr. Hayes observed. If that dog helped bring her back from wherever she was, then that's where he belongs. That night, as Chloe slept peacefully for the first time in days, Atlas maintained his vigil from the bed beside hers. His shoulder throbbed, but his heart was full. He had kept his promise. His guardian angel mission was complete, but his love for the little girl with honey-colored hair would last forever. 5 days after Chloe Mitchell opened her eyes in room 314, Millbrook General Hospital had transformed into something between a medical facility and a pilgrimage site. News crews established permanent positions in the parking lot. Social media exploded with the Chloe Strong hashtags. Gift packages and flowers arrived from strangers nationwide who had learned about the little girl who returned from death's threshold and the guardian angel who never lost faith. But inside the pediatric intensive care unit, a different kind of miracle was unfolding. Her neural responses are extraordinary. Dr. Patricia Hayes, the pediatric neurologist, informed Sarah as they observed Chloe through the observation window. Considering her ordeal, the trauma, oxygen deprivation, the comatose state, her recovery defies every medical expectation I've encountered in 20 years of practice. Atlas maintained his position on a specially provided dog bed beside Chloe's hospital bed, his location unchanged for 120 hours except for essential breaks. The veterinary surgeon, Dr. Martinez, had repaired the bullet graze to his shoulder with microsurgical precision. The wound was clean, Dr. Martinez had explained to Jake. Painful but not dangerous. He'll have a small scar, but full function should return within weeks. Yet Atlas refused any suggestion of moving to a veterinary recovery facility. The hospital administration, witnessing the positive effect his presence had on Chloe's healing, had arranged for all his medical care to be provided in her room. He's superior to any medical equipment we possess, Dr. Chen had observed. Her heart rate stabilizes in his presence. Her sleep patterns are more regular. It's as though he's synchronizing her somehow. Sarah hadn't departed the hospital since receiving the call that transformed nightmare into miracle. She slept in the recliner chair, consumed meals from vending machines, and spent every conscious moment marveling at her daughter's chest rising and falling with steady, determined life. "Mama," Chloe whispered, her voice gaining strength daily. "Did Atlas really save me?" "Yes, sweetheart, he really did." The question of exactly how Atlas had detected life when medical professionals declared death had become the subject of intense speculation. Dr. Hayes had theories about K-9 sensitivity to bioelectric fields, about dogs detecting heartbeats too faint for stethoscopes, about the possibility that Atlas's training had taught him to recognize the difference between death and profound unconsciousness. "Animals perceive phenomena beyond our detection," she explained to assembled reporters. "Their senses operate on frequencies exceeding human capability. It's possible that Atlas detected biological activity our instruments missed." But Jake, observing from the press conference room's rear, suspected the truth was simpler and more profound than medical explanations could capture. Atlas hadn't detected life in Chloe's still form. He had refused to accept death. There was a distinction, one that spoke to love's power to transcend logic, hope's ability to sustain faith, and loyalty's refusal to surrender to despair. The corruption scandal that had nearly cost Chloe her life was unraveling with spectacular thoroughness. Captain Richards, facing charges including attempted murder, conspiracy, and corruption, had begun identifying accomplices in exchange for plea negotiations. Officer Brooks, devastated by his role in the conspiracy, was cooperating completely with investigators. Dr. Webb had resigned from the hospital and entered counseling while awaiting trial. But genuine vindication came when FBI investigators, guided by Sarah Mitchell's original testimony, uncovered a corruption network extending far beyond Millbrook's police department. Richards had been selling evidence, concealing crimes, and manipulating the justice system in exchange for payments from criminals who could afford his protection. 37 cases, Agent Patricia Kellner announced at a federal press conference. 37 families denied justice, 37 victims whose deaths were concealed or misrepresented. This investigation will continue until every perpetrator faces accountability. The national attention brought unexpected consequences. Atlas became a celebrity, his photograph gracing magazine covers with headlines like "Guardian Angel Dog Solves Murder" and "The Detective Who Never Surrendered." Hollywood agents called. Documentary filmmakers requested interviews. But Atlas ignored the attention with dignity befitting someone who had never sought fame, only justice. On Wednesday afternoon, as autumn sunlight streamed through the hospital room window, Chloe Mitchell sat up in bed independently for the first time and requested chocolate chip cookies. "I saved some for Atlas," she announced, producing 2 slightly crumbled cookies from a baggie Sarah had brought from home. "He must be very hungry after taking care of me." Atlas accepted the cookies with his characteristic gentleness, his tail moving in slow contentment despite the bandaging around his shoulder. But when Chloe encircled his neck with thin arms and buried her face in his fur, something passed between them that transcended ordinary relationships between child and pet. "Thank you for staying with me in the scary place," she whispered into his fur. "Thank you for bringing me back home." Atlas pressed his head against her shoulder, and Jake could have sworn he detected understanding in those intelligent eyes. Not just word recognition, but comprehension of something deeper. Love had called, and loyalty had responded. Death had claimed, and hope had refused to surrender. A little girl had been lost in darkness, and her guardian angel had maintained watch until she found her path back to light. "When may we go home?" Chloe asked her mother. Sarah stroked her daughter's honey-colored hair, marveling at the warmth of life beneath her fingers. "Soon, sweetheart, very soon." Atlas lifted his head and gazed toward the window, where sunset painted the sky in shades of promise. Home was wherever Chloe was safe. Home was wherever justice had been served. Home was wherever a German shepherd could rest, knowing his vigil was complete, his duty fulfilled, his love vindicated. But as he settled back beside the girl who had given his life meaning, Atlas remained alert. He had learned that safety was fragile, that evil could wear familiar faces, that vigilance was eternal. He was, after all, a guardian angel, and guardian angels never truly sleep. 18 months later, on a crisp Ohio morning that smelled of new beginnings and second chances, Atlas stood in the governor's mansion rose garden, wearing a medal that caught sunlight like captured hope. For extraordinary courage in the protection of innocent life, for unwavering loyalty in the pursuit of justice, and for demonstrating the highest values of service and sacrifice, Governor Patricia Chen Williams read from the official citation. "The state of Ohio proudly awards the Medal of Valor to Atlas, guardian angel and hero." The ceremony was intimate, personal. Just the families whose lives Atlas had saved, the officers who had worked to expose corruption, and the select media representatives documenting what had become known as the Millbrook Miracle. Chloe Mitchell, now 6 years old and radiating health, stood beside Atlas wearing a yellow dress that matched the autumn sunshine. Her recovery had been complete, her testimony against Richards and his conspirators clear and unwavering. She remembered everything: the fear, the pain, the darkness, and the constant presence of her guardian angel who refused to abandon her. "He spoke to me," she had told the therapist. "When I was in the scary place, cold and afraid, Atlas spoke to me. He told me stories and promised he wouldn't leave me alone." The therapists explain this as trauma processing, the mind's method of creating comfort during extremity. But Sarah Mitchell, watching her daughter and Atlas together, suspected that some conversations transcend species boundaries, that some connections operate on frequencies beyond human comprehension. The investigation into the Millbrook corruption scandal has resulted in 51 indictments, Agent Kellner announced at the press conference following the ceremony. Captain Tom Richards received a sentence of 25 years without parole. Dr. Marcus Webb received 8 years and has agreed to testify in related cases. Officer Daniel Brooks, who cooperated fully with investigators, received 3 years and has entered a program for law enforcement trauma counseling. But true justice, Sarah reflected as she watched Chloe feed Atlas a congratulatory cookie, wasn't found in prison sentences or federal investigations. True justice was her daughter's laughter echoing across the governor's garden. True justice was Atlas's tail wagging as children from other families approached to pet the famous guardian angel. True justice was the knowledge that good had triumphed, not through violence or revenge, but through the simple refusal to surrender hope. Jake Morrison, now promoted to detective sergeant and assigned to lead a new police corruption task force, knelt beside Atlas as photographers captured the moment. "Ready to return to work, partner?" Atlas turned his gaze from the medal ceremony to Chloe, who was demonstrating proper dog petting techniques to other children. His message was clear. His most important work would always be right here, protecting the small human who had taught him that love could conquer death, that loyalty could expose lies, that sometimes the greatest heroism was simply refusing to give up. "I think he has his priorities established," Sarah said, joining Jake beside the dog who had saved her daughter's life. The social media response to Atlas's story had exceeded every prediction. The original news footage of him in Chloe's coffin had been viewed 63 million times. Atlas, the guardian angel, had trended globally for 8 weeks. Publishing companies offered book deals. Netflix requested documentary rights. But Atlas remained focused on the only audience that mattered, the little girl with golden hair who called him her guardian angel and still waited for him at 4:15 every afternoon in Central Park. "What happens now?" a reporter asked Sarah during the brief question period. Sarah looked at Chloe, who was demonstrating proper dog petting technique to a group of fascinated children, while Atlas patiently endured the attention with the dignity of someone who understood that fame was temporary, but love was eternal. "Now we return home," Sarah said simply. "We return to our normal life, except now we understand how precious normal truly is." The ceremony concluded with Atlas and Chloe walking together across the garden, surrounded by autumn leaves and autumn light, while photographers captured images that would grace magazine covers and inspire countless families dealing with their own struggles against injustice and despair. But Jake Morrison would remember a different image. Atlas and Chloe sitting together on a bench, the girl's small hand resting on the dog's noble head, both of them watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that promised tomorrow would be better than today. In a world often dominated by darkness, they had proven that light endures. In a system sometimes corrupted by power, they had demonstrated that truth prevails. In a society that occasionally forgets the value of innocence, they had reminded everyone that some things are worth protecting at any cost. Atlas had earned many titles in the months following Chloe's rescue: hero dog, detective, miracle worker, symbol of hope. But as they walked home together through the streets of Millbrook, past the park where they had first met, past the corner where everything had almost ended, past the church where Atlas had refused to say goodbye, the German shepherd carried only the title that mattered: guardian angel. Some responsibilities, after all, never really end. Some love transcends the boundaries of species, circumstance, and even death itself. Some heroes wear fur instead of badges, carry loyalty instead of weapons, and understand that the greatest victories are won not through force, but through the simple revolutionary act of never giving up on love. If you believe in the power of loyalty, justice, and second chances, share Atlas and Chloe's story. Because sometimes the most important truths come from the least expected sources, and sometimes the greatest heroes have four legs, intelligent eyes, and hearts too big for this world to contain.